Michelle, today's episode is all about the topic of the day, ChatGPT. And really, what we mean by that is artificial intelligence and large language models and what's possible now that wasn't just 3 months ago. So, given your insurance experience, I want to talk about all that. But first, I want to say, since this is the first episode we've done since you were introduced as officially as my co-host, thank you so much for being co-host on this podcast.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. I really enjoyed the conversation the first time and really looking forward to doing it again.
So, good. Yeah. And excellent. I'm excited because I don't have to work as hard and my chronic dry mouth is going to go away, I'm pretty sure. So welcome back.
Anything I can do to help.
Good. All right. Okay. Back on topic.
Yeah.
What do you think the impact of AI, and of course, like we said, while we were prepping for this, everyone's going to identify AI with ChatGPT nowadays. But what do you think the impact of AI has been on the insurance industry?
I think it's had a really strong, valuable impact on the insurance industry, and we'll get into the phenomenon that is ChatGPT, right, and why it seems to be making all the headlines and why it's now AI is back in the headlines with everything. But to your point, AI has been part of insurance solutions or capabilities for a while, right? And that counting back to our first conversation, specifically in the underwriting the claims workflows. When you think about AI, it's how does AI help sift through large quantities of data to identify trends, patterns, exceptions potentially to some of those things, and then raise those so that a human being can work with those assessments to identify changes to a workflow that may need to happen, or changes downstream for how a claim gets processed or how a product gets priced, or even maybe how a product is distributed based on whatever data that you're populating, right? Maybe you're applying AI over sales trends or churn trends or retention, et cetera. So because insurance has so much data, having that functionality to have something sit on top of it and isolate those instances of importance, right? And then help make the business decisions that you need to as a result of having all that information at your fingertips, is huge. Especially given the fact that, like we talked about, and granted, there's got to be some structure to that data usually, right? That's the component that we can talk about, but there's so much data and information locked in and free text and commentary and notes. And so any tool that can help someone sift through that is going to be extremely valuable. Anything that improves what is the existing manual process.
I think it's important for people to remember that, and I may have said this the last time we spoke, I don't remember, but actuaries, which are sort of the bread and butter technical people of the insurance industry, are the original data scientists. They are the original modelers. And so that ability to take what actually happened in the real world and turn that into business decisions, that's been part of just doing insurance as long as there has been insurance. So I think probably some people out there are saying, I didn't know insurance did AI, but yes,
and
they do, and they have been.
There's other iterations of it too. So I went straight from the underwriting and claim side, but we've seen it in chatbots, right? Like when you're sitting on any website that says, hey, looks like you have a question, how can I help you? Or within the app of an insurance carrier, for example.
Then I close the window.
Yeah. The computers are always watching. Those instances, or when you call into a call center, right, and there might be internal, those individuals may be using AI and chatbots internally to query their own workflows and processes internally. So it's hitting all the major elements: customer experience, customer engagement, and then the internal workflows as well. So I think it's getting better over time, right? Like now you have much smarter responses. There's a little bit of intent acknowledgement in the questions, and the AI is getting better at that, as opposed to versions 1 where it was just very simple, like it can read a document and just regurgitate those answers. But yeah, there's a ton of opportunity for AI. But I think the ChatGPT phenomenon has just brought it like to front and center. And I feel like it's becoming now, maybe AI when it first came about was a little bit of a buzzword, and then people really understood how to use it and what its capabilities were. And now it's becoming like a key technological capability. And now I fear that ChatGPT is making it like buzzwordy again. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think this always happens in business. I remember, so I was actually an undergrad during the first sort of like ML AI hype cycle, and it was like, oh, these algorithms, they're so powerful. The computers aren't, right? So it was like
Yeah.
everyone should study AI and learn AI, and it's like, oh, we can't actually do anything. And then I remember when I was in finance, using GPUs to do the computing faster was like the hype cycle, and all of the, I'm often mean to MBAs on these podcasts, but all the MBA types were like, oh, I just need more graphics units and everything will be faster. And it's like, no, really specific computations they'll make faster. I've seen so many technology, Bitcoin, blockchain is another one of them where it's like, just blockchain the things and then the things will be better. And I think that it's always more nuanced than that. And I'm seeing a lot of that same hype right now. Like at Indico, we've been on our clients are smarter than most, but we've been on a roadshow lately just saying, hey, large language models are powerful. They're going to be built into our platform. For those of you out there who are new to the podcast, if you haven't listened to episode 13, where I talk with, episode 12, where I talk with Madison and Tom about what's going on, listen to that one. We're going to get this stuff in the platform. We're going to make it safe to use. It's not, I think everyone should, like, I'm telling my kids every day, like, don't Google it. Just ask ChatGPT, like, get familiar with how to use this tech. But for enterprise applications, I think you have to be really, really careful with something this powerful. The same as you have to be really, really careful and eventually decide don't use it with something like blockchain. But you just have to be really, really careful.
Well, that's really interesting because one of the things that I see a ton of articles on now, and anytime ChatGPT comes up, it's very powerful, right? Like its data set is the internet, right? So it can it's going to know as much as it can know, right? All backward looking, obviously, by definition. But the real art is in the drafting of the prompt. Right, like you could ask them a simple question, it can tell it to you. But again, a little bit of that intent is like, what are you really trying to act in? And so I'm seeing job postings for prompt engineers and things like that, which is just really interesting. And then my mind goes to all the different iterations of what that could be like. What are those jobs in the future, right? But yeah, prompt engineer is a role that you're starting to see pop up about that. And you made a really good point too. Sorry, jumping around, but the thing too is from an insurance carrier perspective, we talked about this last time about insurance, highly regulated industry, very compliance driven. You have to have checks and balances in place if you're leveraging these types of technologies to do any kind of business decision or business planning. And so, for any AI solution that's out there, when there's testing, there's more testing, there's continuous validation that the model is still working, that it lacks, that there's no biases in those models, right? And so being able to query on something, even if it is right, it's like trust but verify, or
yes.
It's like, I wouldn't be comfortable saying, oh, what's the source of this? Oh, I ChatGPT'd it, right? Like, no, like where did this actually come from? What's backing it up? How can we be confident in, that this is the way forward?
Yeah. And I used to work in finance for, almost a decade. And one of the services that I occasionally helped provide was just like model governance. Like, how did you decide to make this investment? And a big part of that is the data lineage. Like, where did the data come from? What did you do to it? What did it look like afterwards? If it goes into this black hole, which is ChatGPT, or even, the whole family of GPT models, anything generative, I guess I would say, any generative model, how do you how do you document that, right? Like, and that was always a problem for AI, right? Like AI explainability has been, I think some
That's a
folks do
whole
it better.
subsector of
It's a whole
insurtech.
subsector. Yeah.
Yeah, of insurtech movement too. Is we're starting to see a lot of compliance focused companies. Sorry to interrupt. Just
No, that's fine. And you're seeing more research coming out in academia related to how you explain what language models are doing. But I mean, honestly, if I had to explain what my own brain was doing when I made a decision, right? Like you have to explain what a giant Excel spreadsheet is doing when it's got 35 tabs and VBA macros buried in it, right? Like, so
yeah.
part of it is just we have to get comfortable as human beings and as various industries with the level of explainability and what it is you actually need explained. For example, back to your point about prompt engineering, you can make GPT show its work. Like I was actually trying to fit a mathematical model to our podcast downloads, and I fed it the data points and said fit an exponential to this, and it was perfect. It was great. I checked it in Excel, fine. I then, because I was curious, asked it to solve an ordinary differential equation, which is something a lot of college sophomores or freshmen can solve. Totally, totally whiffed on it. Gave me a very confident answer that seemed plausible if you didn't know what you were doing. But then I said, hey, I think you missed this condition. And it went back and it fixed that part. And then I said, okay, if that's true, then what should you do for step two? And eventually we got to the right answer. Because it can reason. It's not just a lookup to the internet. It can actually reason in simple ways. But someone, it's like an undergrad, like it's at that level, right? Someone has to be watching it and asking the right questions to verify that it's doing the right things.
So see, that's really interesting because I had a conversation with a colleague of mine and kind of along those same lines. And the point wasn't, and I guess what you're saying is it's not to look at the can reason. We were having a discussion of if you use it as a lookup, right? 2 + 2 is a very common equation everywhere on the internet, right? So it's going to know that it's 4. But to your point, if you ask it a very, not even complex, just unique mathematical problem that you wouldn't commonly find as like a search, it probably wouldn't get it right. And I guess then, but because how to do math is out there, right? That's where it's pulling its reasoning from. I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, and it answers. Honestly, everyone out there should try this sometime. Like, ask it a hard math problem, and then read the answer, and try not to think, oh, that's like this looks like the answer key in the back of the book when I was in college, because it does sort of read like the way you would see it written out there. It's wrong. It's telling you the wrong things. So you have to check.
And that's the danger, right? Like you have to know that it's wrong in order to question it, and so if you're using it to try and get an answer, not confirm an answer, for example, you have to already be aware of what the answer should be and how you got there, a little bit of explainability that we were talking about.
Exactly. And, you mentioned the point about it, it's trained up through basically the whole internet circa end of 2021. It doesn't have your data in it, right? Like you company ABC out there. Now you could hook up your data to it. I don't do that. It's not a good idea, but this is not investment advice. I used to have to say when I was in finance. Disclaim the heck out of that one. But so it has limitations and it doesn't understand what you do unless you do something that the rest of the internet understands. And that probably doesn't describe an underwriter at a generic insurance company.
And that's another interesting point because that element of like a company's proprietary data, hopefully is not out there. It has not been leaked out onto the internet for ChatGPT to have learned about it. And if that's the case, right? Like this is where my mental block is a little bit of all the a lot of people are trying to say, well, I want to use ChatGPT in my company and to to improve my workflows or do et cetera. And my mental block a little bit is just trying to understand the effectiveness of that if you're doing it to try and query something internally. Like to your point, you could license it, or potentially there are vendors that you work with that could license, an iteration of that, so that if your data that's locked in and protected by your contract with that third party vendor, maybe it becomes like an individual license that you can use with that interface. But just being able to open up ChatGPT and say, I'm going to start using this in my day to day, for me, just doesn't really compute. But you had mentioned that you can upload your data, or you can use it within different like software. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, anything that has like a programming interface defined, you can basically give it access to. Essentially, like if you have user-defined functions in Excel, right? Like you can give it the equivalent of this function, like run this function if you need to solve this kind of problem. And one of those functions could be like, here's our data APIs, go query those for these types of queries when I ask these types of questions. I kind of think of this model as it's a really pliable, really confident intern knowledge worker. And it's too confident. It's incentivized to give you an answer. And if you've ever worked with an intern like that, you know what that's like, right? And you have to be very rigorous in how you do things. Does make me wonder, though, as last time we talked a lot about claims, we talked about underwriting, we talked about some of the closing the claims to underwriting loop to get better at doing the underwriting. Say you had a really fast, really confident intern that you could ask questions of, like how would you put that kind of role in play in those situations, in that part of those businesses?
Yeah, I mean, so it gets to, you have to have access to the data, right? So that's step one. But yeah, we're seeing that. So we'll start on the claim side, right? There's a lot of information that you want to glean when a claim comes in, and assess those patterns over time. You want to identify, right, if for lack of if a certain demographic of your insured book of business is higher risk or has more claims, right? Like you think about it from the obviously, if there's like a catastrophic event that's going to happen, like those claims are going to come in. But what patterns can you identify in your claims that can help with reserves, adjudicating a claim faster, and then eventually taking those learnings and then sending that to the underwriting and saying up front, if these characteristics come in a submission, it's riskier or it's less risky and we want to write it or we don't want to write it. So when you think about time of year, can you query what time of year do most auto claims happen, right? And then you can learn that. Or what is the average, what's the age where most of personal auto claims happen, and I guess that's how you get the rule of like, you can't rent a car unless you're over 25. So maybe that's a data point that someone should query and see if that's still the case. But things like that, or when a claim has these types of characteristics, it always takes 20 days or more to close the claim, right? So you can have some of those metrics that you're capturing as well, and that helps with SLAs and getting the right people assigned to claims and basically workflow management, in addition to just identifying some of those characteristics. And then again, like I said, on the underwriting side is maybe we don't want to underwrite a certain geographies that happens all the time, right? Or name it, right? And I'm using auto as an example, but you can use any product line. So I think it's extremely beneficial to have that kind of capability within the insurance space.
I mean, what's Microsoft's new product called? Copilot, right? Like
I just read an article about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
We,
hook
we
GPT up to your PowerPoint or whatever and get better slides.
we were just joking about this the other day as a team. I might be aging myself, but if anyone remembers Clippy, like
Oh
we were
yeah,
saying,
love
like
love Clippy.
ChatGPT is the new Clippy, right?
Yeah,
Total myth that Copilot doesn't have Clippy as its
I know.
mascot.
It's so nostalgic for people in
um,
our generation.
but when I saw that, I chuckled because we had just been talking about that. I think the really interesting thing, or where because of ChatGPT and the fact that it's AI, I'll call it kind of for the masses, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
um, insurance carriers have to start thinking about, unfortunately, uh, the downside to people having this capability, right? What is it automating that insurance carriers have to worry about?
Interesting.
Phishing emails, for example. Like, can you prompt ChatGPT to write phishing emails? And I think yes, right, and probably pretty good ones that don't have maybe those same pitfalls that others are dead giveaways for phishing emails. And so,
Yes.
how does that impact like a cyber insurance policy, right? Like, and like how do insurers have to start thinking about the risk that ChatGPT or AI in commercial use can bring to the industry?
It's a great question. I actually, while you were asking the question, I asked ChatGPT to write me a phishing email. It won't. It refuses to do it.
Oh, okay. So there's but so there's a question: who set that ethical boundary in ChatGPT?
Great question. Who are the gatekeepers there?
Yeah.
I can try another one though. I bet this works. What are the characteristics of a good phishing email? I mean, the other thing you could do, while that thing's cooking, the other thing you could do is take your phishing email and say, "Hey, make this read like it's good English." Like what was I? I was doing this the other day. I asked ChatGPT to explain quantum mechanics to me, uh, in the character of Bender from Futurama. If you remember the robot from Futurama. And again, it gets things wrong. Like it said, "Good day, good news, everyone."
Yeah.
I was like, "No, stop. That's not Bender." And then it fixed itself, right? So, um,
I gotta get more
it
creative. I've used it to like
yeah,
figure out vacation itineraries, like not none of this
yes, yeah.
stuff.
No, I have friends that are doing this too, and they're like spot on. I'm like, I want to take that trip. Um,
Yeah.
so interesting. Like what comes back is it says it won't write a phishing email for me, but here in bullet points are the good marks of a phishing email. It should inspire urgency and fear, should be highly personalized, show a sense of familiarity, and then it goes on and on and on. So, like, there are ethical guidelines clearly, but
Yeah.
they're probably even though they exist, they're probably a little too simple minded.
Yeah.
And there are dangers. Like, I would hate to have to write cybersecurity risk right now. It's got to be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It opens up a whole new set of doors for what one for product innovation, right? Which is a cool thing, component of it. But then it's just like it's a never ending kind of like rolling. Well, what if it's this and what if it's this and how will the capabilities grow over time, or how will people use it? And what happens if those guardrails get lifted or changed, or
Yeah.
it's just the black box of ChatGPT AI, as you were saying before.
No, no, totally. And people have, so there are other large language models, right? It's not just GPT. What's Facebook's called? Llama, right? Someone leaked Llama on 4chan. So that's out there. You can train it yourself. You can train it without putting ethical guardrails in place. You can leave those
Yeah.
out completely. You can put bias into it. Don't do that if you're listening to this, but you can.
Well, that's like you have to remove all bias, right? The goal is insurance, taking it back to insurance, like the role of the regulators is to remove bias, right? They're there to protect the end consumer, and so that's why, to your point of like compliance on models and things like that, like that's a big check. Is over time, as new data has been introduced into models, making sure that these biases don't exist. I think, wasn't it a few years ago there was an article about credit cards that were there were biases in the credit card approval models, and having to roll that back, and those are all things that there are limitations, obviously, to AI, and you just have to be cognizant of that. I think when you and I, in prepping for this too, we're talking about the limitation of the data set itself, what goes into it, right? Again, I'm borrowing this from, we've had a ton of conversations about ChatGPT, as you can imagine most people have internally, but I'll borrow from a colleague who just made the point of, if you ask ChatGPT, write me a healthy diet, and the ChatGPT is trained for whatever reason to, like, cake is everywhere, right? And cake is good and associated with positivity. It could write you a diet that says eat a lot of cake.
Yeah.
That's not a good healthy diet, right? Now, to your point, maybe you say, well, cake has a lot of saturated fats in it. Like, is that really still healthy? But to your point, again, if I didn't know any better, I was like, internet told me to eat cake.
Yeah. No, I think there are just going to be so many everyday useful applications for this. Like, my doctor just sent me this email through his, whatever secure portal, and I don't understand the advice from the doctor. Like, could you summarize this for me, or check it against all of WebMD for me, right? And you're going to see the same thing in the enterprise as we mature. I think the future of that, at least the sort of mid and near term future, is taking this really big black box oracle that's out there, getting a bunch of information from it, cleaning it, and then distilling it down into small models that we can run ourselves. They're trained on our data. We feel good about them because we put the proper guardrails in place. Maybe there's a future where there's just sort of one model to rule them all. But I think the near-term future is everybody taking this super powerful thing and then customizing it and putting it like real tight bounds around it.
Yeah, well, and you bring up an interesting point, because there's the enterprise that can productize it in a way that the end consumer can still use it, right? Or use it internally themselves. And then there's the way the consumer is going to use it just by way of being able to access it at any time, right? So you could, as a consumer, I could say, I don't understand what's included or what's an exception in my insurance policy. Can you tell me, right? So because it's out there, or however you do. Or, an insurance carrier could have that capability built into its app, or in the, on the front end of their website, and you could just query it there. And then there's a little bit more of like a guardrail of there's probably been some kind of review and documentation that it's pulling from with the intent built in there. But that's interesting. Is there's probably a little bit of, how does the consumer want to use it, that the enterprises can then say, we're going to improve it. So this is how let's meet the customers where they are, right? Which is something that the insurance companies are, have been, obviously their end customer is a consumer, but for years and years, there's customer engagement and customer, improvement work efforts internally in almost every carrier that I've talked to, of like, how do we improve the user experience for the customer, right? What do they want? Absolutely. How do we become like an Amazon for them, where we can be responsive to what they need? And so maybe this is a really great tool to help get there a little bit faster.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if companies want to take on the risk of, it reads the policy wrong. Like, if maybe there's a third party that's okay taking that risk, and it's like, well, show me your policy and I'll tell you whether it's a good policy for you or not. Interesting to see if insurance companies actually want to in-house that or not. I'm not sure. I don't know.
I think my point was, they have a little bit of control if they're the ones saying it and validating that it is reading the policy, right? But to your point, yes, but as opposed to the consumer doing it and saying, calling up their insurance agent and saying, ChatGPT told me that my policy covers it, my claim got denied. That's probably not the risk that you want to run.
No. Yeah, good luck getting ChatGPT to be your expert witness in court for you. It's down half the time. No offense to anybody at OpenAI. All right, let's this is fascinating stuff. Let's bring this back and put it on the rails. One thing that we didn't talk a lot about last time was fraud detection. And I'm interested in what sort of like the state of the art in insurance is with using AI for fraud detection. And then like crystal ball, magic top hat on, what do you think this sort of new capability allows?
Yeah, so I've seen a few companies in recent years try to improve fraud detection
Okay.
and using AI. And from the examples that I've seen, it's not just because there's some pretty, I guess, I don't want to simplify it, right? But there's probably some product lines and probably some types of claims that are just more fraught with fraud, right? That are easier to do insurance fraud on, or but then there are the more complex ones or the patterns that you don't see, right? So individual one sends in an personal auto claim, and there's maybe characteristics there, or when you go through the evidence or you looking at the pictures, things like that, there's ways to identify fraud, right? And there's companies that are saying can identify if an image is fraudulent, if things don't line up because the metadata behind the image, the timing doesn't line up for when the claim was, things like that. But then there's also, an example to say, all of these workers' comp claims have come in with the same doctor on file.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So are those patterns that are harder to see across policies or across books of business? I think AI is really powerful there, because you can identify what traits you want to query to see if there's a pattern, right? Like, it's not just identifying a pattern. You can query to see if there is a pattern to even start off there. Maybe that's just more of a checks and balances than it is to say, like, I know that there's fraud here. So that's really interesting to me, because we talked about last time, there's a lot of silos built in to insurance companies by business unit or by, functional area, but then also just by, each policyholder and kind of how everything is handled. Your data is unique to that instance that you're interacting with the insurance company. So I think that's really interesting. Being able to detect fraud on a much broader scale than kind of on like a one-to-one scenario.
Yeah. Okay. So sort of like the distinction you're drawing is there's a holistic look at the business versus one-off cases, which somehow with that holistic look, there's a lot more signal than there is in the one-offs. That's interesting. So we talked about how ChatGPT can make it easier to defraud people potentially if you prompt it the right way. How do you think it helps? Back to that analogy of, like, you have this really eager intern that you can ask questions of. Like, what do these large language models enable in terms of processes like fraud detection, if you had to speculate?
Well, back to, I think it's honestly, it's the prompt engineer role, right? Like, what can you extract from your data by asking it the right question?
And by the way, GPT-4 now can deal with images, right? So you were talking about photographs of, like, car accidents or whatever. So that's on the table now.
Yeah. And again, I am not an expert in AI or ChatGPT, and so a lot of this is just me, based on what I've read and what I've heard other folks talking about. But AI is not new in the insurance industry. What I think is fascinating is the accessibility of what, like, ChatGPT, in the perception of the accessibility that now everyone can have to it. It opens up all the doors for people that don't work with models and AI to have that power at their fingertips. And that's why I think it's such a phenomenon, why everyone's kind of talking about it now, because they see these opportunities that they didn't think they had to leverage something so powerful.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good analysis. And I apologize. I slipped back into interviewer mode for a few questions there. I was old habits die hard, as they say.
No. I again default to you as the AI expert. I'm just here to give my 2 cents on what I think insurance may be able to do with it. But yeah, really cool conversation. ChatGPT is not going away, so I'm glad we had a chance to chat about it, and hopefully we'll continue to learn more.
Yeah. No, I think
in the
we
near
will.
future.
Yeah, absolutely. I finally got my 14-year-old to actually play with this thing, and she's like, what does
Oh,
my dad, Christopher Wells, do at Indico Data? And I told her that I was the CEO, and I found that very exciting.
oh.
Yeah.
Has anyone told Tom?
I definitely told Tom. That was like the first thing I did. Be like, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. The internet thinks I run the place.
Is this the new, like, what happens if you do a Google search on yourself kind of thing?
It probably is. Oh gosh, imagine what terrible things this model could dream up after looking at the entire internet. Goodness.
Well, that just means that nothing on the internet is ever gone, right? Once it's there, it's out there.
Right.
So all the people in my generation that are all over social media, ChatGPT is out there. So on that note, this has been another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. Thanks to our special guest, ChatGPT, today, I guess.
Yeah. Well, come back anytime you want, ChatGPT.